Sometimes the biggest secret in a room is standing right in front of everyone. The ballroom of the Whitmore Grand Hotel glowed beneath crystal chandeliers that scattered golden light across polished marble floors and elegantly decorated tables. Soft piano music drifted through the air while guests in designer suits and evening dresses gathered around displays of flowers, gifts, and baby-themed decorations worth more than many families spent on a home. It was supposed to be a celebration. The future heir of Ethan Whitmore, one of the youngest and most successful CEOs in Chicago, would soon be arriving. Business leaders, politicians, socialites, and members of the media filled the room, all eager to congratulate the man who seemed to have everything. Ethan stood near the center of the ballroom, tall and confident in a tailored navy suit, smiling politely as guests shook his hand. Beside him stood Claire Bennett, his elegant fiancée, one hand resting gently against her growing stomach. Cameras flashed. Laughter echoed through the room. To everyone watching, the scene looked perfect. Yet Ethan felt strangely disconnected from the celebration unfolding around him. He could not explain why. Perhaps it was the exhaustion from months of preparation. Perhaps it was the pressure of constant attention. Or perhaps it was because one particular guest had accepted an invitation he never truly expected her to accept. Across the room, several guests suddenly turned toward the entrance. The subtle shift in attention spread through the ballroom like a ripple moving across still water. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. Ethan instinctively followed their gaze. The large doors at the entrance slowly opened. For a moment, all he could see was sunlight streaming through the glass lobby beyond. Then a familiar figure appeared. Vanessa Brooks stepped into the room. Time seemed to hesitate. Ethan had not seen her in almost 7 years. She looked different, yet exactly the same. Her natural beauty had matured into something stronger and more self-assured. She wore a simple emerald green dress that carried more elegance than the expensive designer outfits surrounding her. Her posture remained graceful. Her expression remained calm. Most striking of all was the complete absence of bitterness in her eyes. She did not look like a woman returning to confront her past. She looked like a woman who had already survived it. Ethan felt his chest tighten unexpectedly. Memories he thought he had buried years ago surfaced without warning. The laughter they once shared. The dreams they once planned. The marriage neither of them imagined would end. Around the ballroom, whispers quietly began spreading. Some guests recognized her immediately. Others remembered only fragments of old stories. Claire noticed the sudden attention and glanced toward the entrance. Her polite smile stiffened slightly. Vanessa paused near the doorway as though considering whether she should continue. Then she took a breath and stepped forward. But she was not alone. 2 young girls walked beside her. They appeared to be around 6 years old. Both wore matching pale blue dresses and carried themselves with the effortless confidence only children possess. One held Vanessa's hand. The other walked independently while looking around the enormous ballroom with open curiosity. The sight seemed innocent enough at first. Then people began looking more closely. One conversation stopped. Then another. A woman near the gift table lowered her champagne glass halfway to her lips and forgot to take a sip. An older businessman frowned as though trying to solve a puzzle. Ethan found himself staring. The younger girl tilted her head while studying a large floral arrangement. The older one smiled at something her sister whispered. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. The resemblance was impossible. Not because they looked exactly like him. Because they looked enough like him that coincidence immediately felt inadequate. The shape of the eyes. The smile. The expressions. Something about them struck a place deep inside him that logic could not immediately reach. Vanessa continued walking through the room, seemingly unaware of the growing tension surrounding her arrival. The girls remained close beside her. Guests politely stepped aside as she passed. Some smiled. Others stared openly. Ethan could feel dozens of eyes shifting between him and the children. Claire's expression grew increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, Vanessa stopped several feet away. For a moment, neither she nor Ethan spoke. The years between them seemed to stretch across the ballroom. Then one of the little girls looked up at Ethan with bright, curious eyes and smiled. The smile hit him harder than any words could have. Around them, the celebration had almost completely faded into silence. Nobody understood exactly what was happening, but everyone felt it. And as Ethan stared at the 2 girls standing beside the woman he once loved, A question began forming in his mind that would soon change every part of his life. The silence inside the ballroom stretched for several long seconds before the music quietly resumed and conversations cautiously returned. Yet the atmosphere had changed. Every guest could feel it. Ethan Whitmore remained frozen where he stood, unable to pull his eyes away from the two little girls beside Vanessa Brooks. Claire slipped her arm through his and offered a polite smile toward the newcomers, but even she seemed unsettled by the attention suddenly surrounding them. Vanessa greeted a few familiar faces with calm professionalism, showing no sign that she noticed the growing whispers moving through the room. The twins, however, seemed completely unaware of the tension. They looked around with wide-eyed curiosity, fascinated by the decorations, the flowers, and the towering cake displayed near the center of the ballroom. One of them pointed toward a table covered in pastel gifts. "Mommy, look at all the presents." Her voice carried clearly through the nearby crowd. Several guests smiled at the innocence of the comment. Vanessa gently squeezed her daughter's hand. "Remember your manners, Ava." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Ava. Somehow hearing the little girl's name made the situation feel more real. The second twin leaned closer to her sister and whispered something that immediately made both girls laugh. The sound was warm and genuine. Ethan found himself staring again. There was something painfully familiar about the way they smiled. Something he could not explain. Across the ballroom, Ethan's mother, Sophia Whitmore, stood near a group of guests. Unlike everyone else, she was not staring at the children with curiosity. She was staring at Vanessa with unmistakable concern. The expression lasted only a moment before disappearing behind her usual polished composure. Ethan noticed it immediately. A strange feeling settled into his chest. Before he could process it further, one of the twins suddenly looked directly at him. Her bright eyes widened slightly. Then she smiled. "Mommy," she said softly, tugging Vanessa's hand. "That man looks like the picture." Vanessa's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not panic, not fear, something closer to caution. Ethan felt the room grow smaller around him. "What picture?" Ava asked her sister. The younger girl shrugged. "The old one in the memory box." Vanessa gently redirected their attention. "Why do you two not go look at the dessert table?" The twins immediately brightened and hurried toward a nearby display under the supervision of an event coordinator. Ethan watched them leave. Then he looked back at Vanessa. 7 years had passed since their divorce. 7 years since the woman he once believed would spend the rest of her life beside him disappeared from his world. He had imagined this reunion many times. None of those versions included two little girls who somehow seemed connected to memories he could barely understand. Claire finally broke the silence. "Vanessa," she said with a practiced smile. "It is nice to see you again." Vanessa nodded politely. "Congratulations." The exchange remained cordial, but the warmth was absent. Ethan could feel it. Everyone nearby could feel it. Claire rested a protective hand against her stomach. "Thank you. We are very excited." Vanessa smiled politely. "You should be." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Ethan finally found his voice. "Can we talk?" Vanessa met his gaze. The years seemed to disappear between them. "This is not the place." Her answer was calm but firm. Ethan nodded slowly. "Then another place." Before she could respond, applause erupted near the center stage as the master of ceremonies announced the next portion of the celebration. Guests gradually turned their attention toward the presentation. Claire was immediately pulled away by family members eager to participate. Ethan remained standing where he was. Vanessa seemed ready to leave the conversation as well. Then something unexpected happened. One of the twins came running back. She stopped directly in front of Ethan and looked up at him. "Excuse me, sir." Ethan smiled automatically. "Yes." The little girl tilted her head. "My mommy says people should always say thank you." Ethan looked confused. "For what?" She smiled brightly. "For the books." Before anyone could respond, she hurried back toward her sister. Ethan stood motionless. The books. Years ago, there had been only one person who ever thanked him for books instead of flowers, jewelry, or expensive gifts. Vanessa. Slowly, he turned toward her. Vanessa's expression revealed nothing. Yet for the first time since she entered the ballroom, Ethan felt absolutely certain of one thing. The answers he had been searching for since the moment she walked through those doors were far bigger than he imagined. And somewhere behind those answers was a secret that had been waiting years to be discovered. The baby shower ended nearly 2 hours later, but Ethan Whitmore could not remember a single speech that had been given. He could not remember the gifts, the laughter, or even the conversations that filled the ballroom after Vanessa Brooks arrived. His mind remained trapped inside one moment after another. The twins smiling, the comment about the picture, the mention of the books. Most of all, the strange feeling that every answer he wanted seemed to be standing just beyond reach. Long after the last guests departed and the hotel staff began clearing decorations, Ethan found himself standing alone near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago. The city lights shimmered against the dark waters of Lake Michigan while traffic moved through the streets far below. Behind him, the celebration had officially ended. Claire was speaking with family members near the lobby. His mother had already left. Yet Ethan remained motionless. Something inside him refused to move forward. The next morning offered no relief. Inside the executive headquarters of Whitmore Industries, meetings filled every hour of his schedule. Financial projections, acquisition reports, expansion strategies. Normally, these discussions demanded his complete attention. Today, he barely heard them. During one presentation, a senior executive paused mid-sentence. Ethan, the CEO, blinked. Sorry. Continue. The meeting resumed, but his thoughts immediately drifted back to Vanessa. 7 years. 7 years without a single meaningful conversation. 7 years believing she had simply walked away from their marriage and from everything they had built together. Yet nothing about yesterday felt simple. Around lunchtime, Ethan finally gave up pretending to work. He closed his laptop, canceled 2 afternoon appointments, and called the only person who had known both him and Vanessa during their marriage. His longtime friend and attorney, Daniel Harper. An hour later, Daniel sat across from him inside a private conference room overlooking the Chicago River. You canceled board meetings for this? Daniel asked with a raised eyebrow. Ethan nodded. I need your opinion. Daniel immediately recognized the seriousness in his friend's voice. About what? Ethan leaned back in his chair. Vanessa. Silence. Daniel slowly exhaled. That name has not come up in a while. Ethan stared out the window. She came to the baby shower. Daniel looked surprised. Really? Ethan nodded. And she brought 2 little girls. The attorney waited. Ethan continued. Daniel, they looked. He stopped. The words felt dangerous even inside a private room. Like you, Daniel finished. Ethan looked away. The silence that followed answered the question. Daniel folded his arms. How old? 6. Daniel frowned slightly. The timing clearly registered in his mind. Neither man spoke for several moments. Finally, Daniel leaned forward. What exactly are you asking? Ethan rubbed his temples. I do not know. That answer was more honest than anything else he could have said. He was not asking whether the girls resembled him. He already knew they did. He was asking whether everything he believed about the past might be wrong. Later that afternoon, Ethan did something he had not done in years. He searched for Vanessa Brooks online. The results surprised him immediately. Community education programs, youth leadership initiatives, nonprofit development projects, local interviews, newspaper articles. Vanessa appeared everywhere. Yet none of the stories focused on personal drama. They focused on impact, on helping families, on creating opportunities for children, on building something meaningful. The woman he found online looked nothing like the bitter ex-wife some people had described after their divorce. If anything, she seemed stronger than ever. One article included a photograph taken during the opening of a community learning center. Vanessa stood surrounded by smiling children. Beside her stood the twins, Ava and Arya. Ethan enlarged the image. His heartbeat quickened. There it was again. The resemblance. The same eyes. The same expressions. The same impossible feeling he could not explain. As evening approached, Ethan found himself parked across the street from the community center featured in the article. He had not planned to drive there. Somehow his car simply ended up outside the building. Children laughed in a nearby playground while parents arrived to pick them up after school programs. The center itself looked welcoming and vibrant, painted with colorful murals and surrounded by small flower gardens. Then he saw her. Vanessa stepped through the front doors carrying a stack of folders. The twins followed beside her. One of the girls was excitedly describing something that happened during the day. Vanessa listened with complete attention. Every few seconds she smiled or laughed softly at whatever story was being told. Ethan watched from across the street. The scene felt painfully ordinary. Yet somehow it affected him more than any dramatic confrontation could have. This was not a woman hiding from life. This was a woman who had built one. And as he sat there watching the three of them disappear toward a nearby parking lot, Ethan realized something that unsettled him more than any resemblance ever could. For the first time since the divorce, he no longer believed he knew the real story of how everything ended. 7 years earlier, long before a baby shower reopened wounds Ethan Whitmore thought had healed, there was a different version of his life. A quieter version. A happier version. On a warm September afternoon, sunlight spilled across the river walk in downtown Chicago as people hurried between offices, restaurants, and coffee shops. Ethan was 29 years old, already running Whitmore Industries, already carrying responsibilities that most people twice his age could barely imagine. Every hour of his day was scheduled. Every decision affected hundreds of employees. Success had become routine. Loneliness had become normal. Then he met Vanessa Brooks. The first encounter lasted less than 10 minutes. Ethan had been invited to speak at a community development conference sponsored by local businesses and nonprofit organizations. Vanessa was there representing an educational outreach program serving underserved neighborhoods throughout Illinois. They should have spent only a few polite moments exchanging introductions. Instead, they found themselves talking long after the conference ended. She challenged his opinions. He challenged hers. Neither seemed impressed by the other's credentials. For the first time in years, Ethan enjoyed a conversation that had nothing to do with profit margins, acquisitions, or corporate strategy. Over the following months, they continued finding reasons to meet. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes for community projects, sometimes for no reason at all. Vanessa brought something into Ethan's life that wealth never could. Simplicity. She laughed easily, listened carefully, never treated him differently because of his success. Around her, he stopped feeling like a CEO and started feeling like himself. Their relationship grew naturally. Saturday mornings became trips to farmers markets. Evenings became walks beside Lake Michigan. Holidays became opportunities to build traditions neither of them realized they desperately needed. Ethan introduced Vanessa to parts of his world. Corporate galas, charity events, executive dinners. She handled every situation with quiet confidence. Vanessa introduced Ethan to hers. Community centers, school programs, neighborhood fundraisers. He discovered a side of Chicago he had never truly seen despite living there his entire life. Somewhere between those two worlds, they fell deeply in love. 2 years later, they married beneath a canopy of lights in a small lakeside ceremony attended by family, friends, and the people who mattered most. Ethan still remembered the way Vanessa looked that evening. The sunlight reflecting off the water. The smile she could not stop trying to hide. The promise in her eyes when she said yes. For a long time afterward, life felt almost impossibly good. Their home became a place filled with laughter, conversation, and plans for the future. They talked about traveling, about building schools, about someday having children. Ethan imagined teaching a son how to fish. Vanessa imagined reading bedtime stories to a daughter. They spoke about those dreams casually because they assumed time was on their side. Neither realized how fragile assumptions could be. The first signs of trouble appeared gradually. Months passed, then more months. Conversations about starting a family became less playful and more serious. Eventually, doctor appointments entered the picture. Tests followed, then more tests. Ethan attended every appointment. He held Vanessa's hand through every waiting room and every consultation. When the results finally arrived, neither was prepared for what they heard. The specialist explained that conceiving naturally might be extremely difficult. Not impossible, but unlikely. The words landed heavily inside the room. Ethan immediately focused on solutions. Additional specialists. Alternative treatments. New possibilities. Vanessa smiled politely during the appointment, but something inside her changed. Later that evening, she stood alone on the balcony of their home, staring out at the city lights. Ethan found her there. Without speaking, he wrapped his arms around her shoulders. For several minutes, they simply stood together. Eventually, Vanessa whispered the question she had been carrying all day. What if I cannot give you the family you deserve? Ethan turned her toward him immediately. You are my family. She smiled through tears. At the time, they both believed love would be enough. For a while it was. Yet outside the walls of their marriage, other voices slowly began entering the conversation. None carried more influence than Sophia Whitmore. Ethan's mother never openly criticized Vanessa. She never raised her voice, never created obvious conflict. Instead, she mastered something far more subtle. Concern disguised as advice. Questions disguised as support. Small comments delivered at exactly the wrong moments. At first, Ethan ignored them. Vanessa did the same. But seeds planted repeatedly have a way of taking root. Looking back years later, Ethan would often remember those early days. Not because they were perfect, because they were real. Before suspicion, before heartbreak, before secrets, before everything began falling apart. There had simply been a man and a woman building a life together while believing nothing could ever come between them. The months that followed the difficult diagnosis changed the rhythm of Ethan and Vanessa's marriage in ways neither fully understood at the time. Nothing dramatic happened overnight. There were no explosive arguments or sudden betrayals. Instead, small disappointments began collecting quietly in the corners of their lives. Another medical appointment ended with uncertainty. Another treatment produced no clear answers. Another month passed without the news they hoped to hear. Through it all, Ethan tried to remain supportive. He attended consultations, researched specialists, encouraged Vanessa whenever discouragement appeared in her eyes. Yet despite his efforts, something else was happening beyond their home. Sophia Whitmore was becoming increasingly involved. At first, her concern appeared genuine. She called frequently to ask how Vanessa was feeling. She sent flowers after difficult appointments. She offered recommendations for doctors and clinics. On the surface, everything seemed supportive. But beneath the kindness lived a subtle pattern Vanessa could not ignore. Every conversation eventually returned to the same subject. Children, family legacy, the future of the Whitmore name. One evening during a family dinner at Sophia's estate, the conversation drifted toward a recent corporate event celebrating several young executives. Sophisticated laughter filled the dining room while waiters quietly moved between guests. Then Sophia smiled and lifted her wine glass. One day, Ethan's children will be sitting at this table discussing the future of Whitmore Industries. The comment sounded harmless. Most people barely noticed it. Vanessa did. Ethan did too. A brief silence followed before someone quickly changed the subject. Yet the moment lingered long after dinner ended. On the drive home, neither mentioned it. They did not need to. Both understood what had been implied. Weeks later, the comments became more direct. Sophia never criticized Vanessa openly. Instead, she framed every concern as worry for her son. Ethan works too hard to have nobody carry on what he built. Or, I simply want him to experience fatherhood someday. Each statement sounded reasonable in isolation. Together, they created pressure that slowly settled over the marriage like invisible weight. Vanessa tried not to let it affect her. She focused on her nonprofit work. The children she helped each day reminded her that motherhood was not defined by biology alone. Yet every time she returned home, she found herself wondering whether she was failing Ethan in some way. The thought broke her heart because Ethan never said those things himself. Not once. In fact, whenever the topic arose, he reminded her that she mattered more than any expectation. But even loving words can struggle against constant outside influence. One rainy afternoon, Vanessa arrived home early from a community outreach event. As she entered the house, she heard voices coming from Ethan's office. The door stood slightly open. She had no intention of listening. Then she heard her name. Instinctively, she paused. Ethan sat behind his desk, while Sophia occupied a chair across from him. "You cannot keep blaming Vanessa," Ethan was saying. Sophia sighed softly. "I am not blaming anyone." "Then stop acting like she is responsible for everything." For a brief moment, relief washed over Vanessa. Then Sophia spoke again. "I am being realistic." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "Mom." Sophia's voice remained calm. "You deserve the chance to have a family." The words hung heavily in the room. Vanessa felt her chest tighten. Ethan immediately responded, "I already have a family." His answer should have comforted her. Instead, sadness filled her heart. Because for the first time, she realized how often he was being forced to defend their marriage. That evening, she sat alone on the back patio long after sunset. The city lights shimmered in the distance while cool air drifted through the yard. Ethan eventually joined her. Without speaking, he wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and sat beside her. For several minutes they watched the skyline together. Then Vanessa quietly asked the question she had been carrying for months. Do you ever wish things were different? Ethan turned toward her immediately. No, she studied his face carefully. Be honest. His expression softened. Vanessa, the only thing I wish is that you would stop carrying this by yourself. Tears filled her eyes. She looked away. Ethan gently took her hand. We are a team. She nodded, but deep inside, uncertainty remained. Because while Ethan still stood beside her, the world around them seemed increasingly determined to convince him he should not. Neither of them realized that life was already preparing a twist neither doctor, family member, nor expert could have predicted. And when that moment arrived, it would come far too late to save the marriage they were struggling so hard to protect. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows while Vanessa Brooks prepared lesson materials for a community literacy program scheduled later that afternoon. Nothing about the day felt unusual. Nothing suggested her life was about to change. Her phone rang shortly after 9 o'clock. The number belonged to a medical specialist she had visited months earlier. At first, she assumed the office was calling about paperwork or routine follow-up information. Instead, the voice on the other end delivered news so unexpected that Vanessa could barely process the words. For several moments, she simply sat at the kitchen table staring through the window. The city beyond remained exactly the same. Cars moved along the street. Neighbors walked their dogs. Children headed toward school. Yet everything inside her world had suddenly shifted. Later that evening, she waited for Ethan to return home. She wanted to tell him in person. She wanted to see the surprise in his eyes and hear the laughter that would surely follow. For the first time in years, hope felt larger than fear. But when Ethan finally arrived, exhaustion covered every expression on his face. Another difficult day at the office. Another tense board meeting. Another conversation with investors. Vanessa decided to wait until morning. One more night would not matter. The next day became another delay. Then another. Every time she prepared to share the news, something interrupted the moment. Business travel, family obligations, unexpected meetings. Life continued moving forward while the secret remained inside her heart. During that same period, tensions within the marriage continued growing. Sophia Whitmore had become more persistent than ever. Her concerns about the future of the family business were no longer hidden beneath polite suggestions. She spoke openly about legacy, succession, and responsibility. Ethan pushed back whenever the topic arose, but the constant pressure was taking a toll. Even simple conversations sometimes ended with frustration neither he nor Vanessa fully understood. One evening, after a particularly difficult argument about unrelated issues, Ethan left the house to clear his mind. Vanessa remained behind, sitting alone in the living room. The unopened envelope containing her latest medical results rested on the coffee table. She picked it up and traced her fingers across the edge. The timing suddenly felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. Days later, she finally gathered the courage to tell him. But before she could, another surprise arrived. Divorce papers. Vanessa stared at the documents in complete disbelief. The legal language blurred before her eyes. Ethan had not delivered them personally. Attorneys handled the process. Meetings had been scheduled. Conversations postponed. Misunderstandings multiplied. To Vanessa, the message seemed devastatingly clear. He had already chosen a future without her. The realization shattered something inside her. She spent the next several days moving through life almost mechanically. Work, home, sleep, repeat. Friends noticed the change but struggled to reach her. Then, just when she believed things could not become more painful, Sophia Whitmore requested a private meeting. They met inside an elegant restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan. Large windows framed the water while soft music drifted through the dining room. Sophia arrived perfectly composed. Vanessa arrived carrying emotions she could barely contain. The conversation began politely. Then Sophia placed a sealed envelope on the table. Vanessa immediately understood that the meeting had never been about reconciliation. Ethan deserves a fresh start, Sophia said calmly. So do you? Vanessa looked at the envelope but did not touch it. Why are you doing this? Sophia folded her hands. Because sometimes letting go is the kindest thing we can do. Vanessa felt tears threaten to appear. She refused to let them fall. You think I am standing in the way? Sophia did not answer directly. She did not need to. The silence itself provided confirmation. For several long moments, neither woman spoke. Then Vanessa slowly rose from her chair. She left the envelope untouched on the table. She walked out of the restaurant with her head held high despite the pain consuming her heart. Yet the story did not end there. Because less than 24 hours later, Vanessa finally opened the medical results she had postponed sharing. The words inside changed everything. She read them once, then twice, then a third time. Tears filled her eyes. Not from sadness this time, from disbelief. The diagnosis that had shaped years of fear no longer defined her future. The impossible had happened. Vanessa was expecting a child. As she sat alone holding the report against her chest, joy and heartbreak collided inside her. The man she wanted to tell no longer seemed part of her life. And far away, Ethan Whitmore remained completely unaware that the future he believed he had lost was already quietly growing beyond his sight. For the next several days, Vanessa Brooks lived between two completely different realities. One filled with hope, the other filled with heartbreak. Every morning, she woke knowing she was carrying a child. Every evening, she went to sleep knowing her marriage was ending. The contradiction felt impossible to explain, even to herself. She considered calling Ethan dozens of times. More than once she picked up her phone and stared at his name on the screen. Yet every attempt ended the same way. Doubt, fear, silence. The divorce process was moving forward with a speed that left little room for conversations she no longer believed he wanted to have. From her perspective, the message seemed clear. Ethan had accepted a future without her. Why would he want to hear about a child now? Meanwhile, Ethan experienced the situation very differently. Long hours at Whitmore Industries consumed his days. Legal advisors, financial consultants, and family pressures surrounded him constantly. He convinced himself the divorce was an unfortunate but necessary conclusion to years of emotional strain. He still loved Vanessa. That was the part nobody understood. Not his attorneys, not his colleagues, not even his mother. Love, however, no longer seemed enough to overcome the growing distance between them. Neither realized how completely their communication had collapsed. Each believed the other had already made a final decision. One rainy afternoon, Vanessa sat inside her apartment reviewing nonprofit grant applications when another unexpected message arrived. It came from Sophia Whitmore. The invitation was brief and carefully worded. Sophia wished to meet one final time. Vanessa almost ignored it. Then curiosity persuaded her otherwise. They met inside a quiet private lounge overlooking Lake Michigan. Gray clouds stretched across the horizon while waves rolled against the shoreline below. Sophia arrived precisely on time. Her appearance remained flawless as always. Her expression remained impossible to read. Vanessa immediately sensed that this meeting carried more significance than the previous one. After a few moments of polite conversation, Sophia finally spoke. "I understand you have moved into a new apartment." Vanessa nodded cautiously. "Yes." Sophia folded her hands together. "That is probably for the best." Vanessa felt a familiar sadness settle inside her chest. "Why did you ask me here?" Sophia studied her carefully. "Because I believe Ethan deserves peace." The words landed heavily between them. Vanessa remained silent. Sophia continued. "The divorce is difficult for everyone. Dragging out the process will only create more pain." Vanessa stared through the large windows overlooking the water. For several moments, she said nothing. Then she quietly asked, "Did you ever believe I was good enough for your son?" The question seemed to catch Sophia off guard. Not because she lacked an answer, because she had not expected such direct honesty. Eventually she replied, "I believe Ethan needs stability." Vanessa smiled sadly. "That was not my question." Neither woman spoke again for several seconds. Finally, Vanessa rose from her chair. She understood something now. No explanation would ever satisfy Sophia Whitmore. No accomplishment would ever change her opinion. No amount of love would ever be enough. As she prepared to leave, her hand instinctively rested against her abdomen. The gesture lasted only a moment. Yet Sophia noticed. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Vanessa immediately realized what had happened. For the first time, she understood that revealing the pregnancy might create complications she was not prepared to face. She left without saying another word. Over the following weeks, her decision became clearer. She would protect her child. Whatever happened next, that responsibility belonged to her alone. She quietly relocated to a smaller community outside Chicago where her nonprofit organization maintained partnerships with local schools. The move allowed her to start over away from public attention. away from gossip, away from the Whitmore name. She continued writing letters to Ethan despite never mailing most of them. In those letters, she described her fears, her hopes, and the future she imagined for the child growing inside her. She told stories about doctor appointments, about hearing a heartbeat for the first time, about standing in a nursery aisle staring at tiny clothes and wondering whether she was carrying a son or daughter. Writing became her way of preserving a connection that no longer existed anywhere else. Then came another surprise. During a routine ultrasound appointment, the technician smiled unexpectedly while studying the screen. Vanessa immediately sensed something had changed. "Is everything okay?" she asked. The technician laughed softly. "Everything is more than okay." Vanessa looked toward the monitor. A few moments later, tears filled her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly. The room seemed brighter somehow. The future suddenly larger than she imagined. She was not preparing to welcome one child into the world. She was preparing to welcome two. As she sat there listening to two tiny heartbeats echo through the room, joy overwhelmed every fear she carried. And hundreds of miles away, Ethan Whitmore remained completely unaware that the family he thought he had lost forever was about to become twice as extraordinary as either of them could have imagined. The years that followed transformed Vanessa Brooks in ways she never expected. The woman who once measured time through medical appointments, legal documents, and heartbreak slowly began measuring it through first smiles, first words, and first steps. Ava and Aria entered the world on a bright spring morning surrounded by doctors, nurses, and an overwhelming amount of love. Vanessa still remembered hearing their cries for the first time. She remembered the tears that immediately filled her eyes. She remembered holding each tiny hand and realizing that despite everything she had lost, life had given her something extraordinary. The early years were not easy. Raising twins alone required strength she never knew she possessed. Some nights, she barely slept. Some mornings, she felt exhausted before the day even began. There were bills to pay, nonprofit projects to manage, and two little girls who depended on her completely. Yet through every challenge, she never once regretted the path she had chosen. Ava and Aria became the center of her world. Their laughter filled rooms that once felt empty. Their curiosity brought joy into ordinary moments. Their presence reminded her daily that hope often arrives in unexpected forms. As the twins grew older, their personalities began to emerge. Ava loved books. She could spend hours curled up in a chair reading stories far beyond her age level. Aria preferred questions. Endless questions. She wanted to understand how everything worked, from traffic lights to airplanes to thunderstorms. Together, they created a balance that constantly amazed Vanessa. The girls shared many physical similarities, but their hearts revealed two wonderfully unique individuals. The years also brought growth for Vanessa's career. The community education programs she helped build expanded throughout Illinois. New partnerships formed. More children gained access to resources and mentorship opportunities. What began as a small outreach effort gradually became a respected nonprofit organization serving thousands of families. Vanessa poured herself into the mission because she understood what it felt like to face uncertainty without support. She wanted other families to have opportunities she once struggled to find. Meanwhile, Ethan Whitmore's life followed a very different path. Whitmore Industries expanded rapidly. Corporate acquisitions increased. Business magazines featured his accomplishments. Awards filled shelves inside his office. To the outside world, he represented success in its purest form. Yet success never seemed to bring the fulfillment he expected. Relationships came and went. Friendships became secondary to work. Even after becoming engaged to Claire Bennett, something often felt incomplete. He rarely spoke about Vanessa anymore. The past remained locked away behind carefully constructed walls. Neither realized how closely their worlds continued moving alongside each other. Occasionally, Ethan's company sponsored community initiatives that indirectly supported programs Vanessa managed. Their names appeared in the same reports without either noticing. Sometimes they attended large charity events in different cities only days apart. Life repeatedly placed them near one another while keeping them separated by timing and circumstance. Then one autumn afternoon, 6 years after the twins were born, Vanessa opened her mailbox and found an envelope that immediately caught her attention. The return address belonged to Whitmore Industries. For several seconds, she simply stared at it. The sight of Ethan's company logo triggered memories she thought had settled long ago. Slowly, she carried the envelope inside and opened it at her kitchen table. The invitation was formal, elegant, unexpected. Whitmore Industries was hosting a charity fundraising gala focused on educational development. Because of her nonprofit work, Vanessa had been selected as one of several honored guests. Her first instinct was to decline. The possibility of seeing Ethan again felt unnecessarily complicated. Yet as she continued reading, another thought emerged. This event represented opportunities for the children and families her organization served. Personal discomfort seemed insignificant compared to that mission. A week later, she attended. The ballroom buzzed with conversation, donors, educators, and business leaders discussing future initiatives. Vanessa remained focused on her work throughout most of the evening. Then, near the end of the event, she saw him. Ethan stood across the room speaking with several executives. Time had changed him. There were more responsibilities in his face now. More experience. More weight. Yet he remained instantly recognizable. For one brief moment, their eyes met. Neither smiled. Neither approached. The encounter lasted only seconds before the crowd shifted between them. Yet something changed afterward. A few days later, a second invitation arrived. This one was different. Personal rather than professional. Claire Bennett and Ethan Whitmore were hosting a baby shower. The invitation included a handwritten note expressing appreciation for her continued nonprofit work and hoping she would attend. Vanessa read the note twice. Then she looked across the room where Ava and Arya sat working on a school project together. Neither girl knew anything about Ethan. Neither knew how closely their lives were connected to the man whose name appeared on the invitation. Vanessa slowly folded the card and placed it on the table. She had no idea that accepting it would become the first step toward uncovering a truth that had remained hidden for more than 6 years. The invitation remained on Vanessa Brooks's kitchen table for 3 days before she finally made a decision. During that time, she picked it up more times than she could count. Sometimes she stared at Ethan Whitmore's name. Sometimes she looked at the elegant script announcing the celebration. Most often, she looked at Ava and Arya sitting nearby, completely unaware of the history connected to the man who had sent it. On the third evening, while the twins worked on a school assignment involving family trees, Ava suddenly asked a question that caught Vanessa by surprise. "Mommy, why do we not have many pictures from when we were babies?" Vanessa paused. The girls had asked questions about their past before, but never quite like this. She sat beside them at the dining room table and smiled gently. "You have pictures." Arya looked up from her notebook. "Not as many as our friends." Vanessa considered her answer carefully. Sometimes people spend more time living important moments than taking pictures of them. The twins accepted the explanation easily and returned to their project. Yet the conversation lingered in Vanessa's mind long after bedtime. That night, after the girls were asleep, she opened an old storage box hidden in the back of her closet. Inside rested pieces of a life she rarely revisited. Photographs, letters, newspaper clippings, a wedding program, a few handwritten notes. Near the bottom sat a framed picture of Ethan taken years earlier during one of their community projects. Vanessa picked it up and traced her fingers across the edge of the frame. She felt sadness, but not bitterness. Time had softened many wounds. What remained was mostly regret for the conversations that never happened and the truths that never reached the people who needed to hear them. The following Saturday, she made her choice. She would attend the baby shower. Not because she wanted answers. Not because she wanted closure. She would attend because hiding from the past no longer seemed necessary. The event represented a celebration. Nothing more. At least that was what she told herself. The morning of the gathering arrived bright and clear. Sunlight poured through the apartment windows while the twins excitedly prepared for what they believed would be a fancy party. Vanessa helped them choose matching pale blue dresses. Ava carefully selected a ribbon for her hair, while Arya spent 10 minutes deciding between 2 pairs of shoes. Their enthusiasm brought a smile to Vanessa's face despite her nervousness. During the drive into downtown Chicago, the girls asked endless questions about the hotel, the guests, and the baby they were supposedly celebrating. Vanessa answered as best she could while keeping her focus on the road. As the skyline appeared ahead, memories returned with surprising clarity. The city had changed over the years. New buildings stood where empty lots once existed. Restaurants had opened and closed. Entire neighborhoods had evolved. Yet certain places remained exactly the same. One of them was the Whitmore Grand Hotel. When they arrived, uniformed attendants greeted guests near the entrance while luxury vehicles lined the circular driveway. Ava stared upward at the towering building. "This place is huge." Arya nodded enthusiastically. "It looks like a castle." Vanessa laughed softly. "Let us try not to get lost inside." The ballroom itself exceeded even the twins' expectations. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Fresh flowers decorated every table. Soft music drifted through the room. The atmosphere felt elegant, welcoming, and carefully planned. For several minutes, Vanessa almost forgot why being there felt complicated. Then she saw Ethan across the room. Even from a distance, she recognized him immediately. Some people leave permanent impressions on the heart. Time changes details, but recognition remains instant. Ethan stood surrounded by guests, smiling politely while accepting congratulations. Yet something about his expression seemed tired. Not unhappy, just burdened by responsibilities invisible to everyone else. Vanessa looked away before he noticed her. The twins, meanwhile, had become fascinated by the decorations. They admired flower arrangements, examined gift displays, and whispered observations to each other while trying to behave properly. Vanessa followed them through the crowd, grateful for the distraction. Then fate intervened in the simplest possible way. Near a display table, Ava stopped abruptly. Her eyes focused on a framed photograph included among several decorative images celebrating Ethan's life. The picture had been taken years earlier. Ethan stood smiling beside a group of volunteers during a literacy campaign. Ava tilted her head. "Mommy," she whispered. Vanessa turned toward the display. The moment she saw the photograph, her breath caught. Before she could respond, Arya stepped closer and studied it as well. The twins exchanged a puzzled look. Neither fully understood what they were noticing. Yet both sensed something familiar. Across the crowded ballroom, Ethan happened to glance in their direction at exactly the same moment. And for the first time since Vanessa walked back into his life, their worlds began moving toward a collision neither of them could stop. The image remained in Ethan Whitmore's mind long after the baby shower ended. Even after the guests departed, after Claire fell asleep, and after the hotel ballroom returned to silence, he could not stop thinking about the moment Ava and Arya stared at the photograph displayed near the entrance. The reaction had been brief, almost insignificant to anyone else. Yet to Ethan, it felt important. The girls had not looked at the picture like strangers. They had looked at it as though they recognized something. The following morning, he arrived at Whitmore Industries earlier than usual. Chicago's skyline was still covered in pale morning light as he entered his office and closed the door behind him. For several minutes, he simply stood there staring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Then he made a decision. He picked up the phone and called Daniel Harper. Less than an hour later, Daniel sat across from him inside the executive conference room. "You look terrible," Daniel observed. Ethan almost laughed. "I probably am." Daniel leaned back. "Still thinking about Vanessa?" Ethan nodded. "And the girls?" Silence followed. Daniel already understood where this conversation was heading. "What exactly are you looking for?" Ethan looked toward the river below. "The truth." Daniel studied him carefully. "That answer sounds simple." "It usually is not." Ethan exhaled slowly. "I spent years believing Vanessa walked away because she wanted a different life. Yesterday made me question everything." Daniel folded his hands. "What changed?" Ethan hesitated. Then he described every detail. The resemblance, the comments from the twins, the photograph, the strange feeling he could not explain. When he finished speaking, Daniel remained quiet for several moments. "And what if you discover something you do not expect?" Ethan answered immediately. "Then at least I will know." By midday, Daniel had already begun reviewing old legal records connected to the divorce. Neither man expected to find anything unusual. Yet the first surprise arrived almost immediately. Several communication logs appeared incomplete. Certain records referenced correspondence that never appeared in the final case files. Daniel frowned while examining the documents. "This is strange." Ethan looked up. "What is?" Daniel tapped a page. "There are references to certified letters sent during the separation process." Ethan frowned. "So, I cannot find copies." Ethan walked around the desk and studied the paperwork himself. The missing documents might have meant nothing. Yet, given everything else, the absence felt significant. "Can you keep digging?" Daniel nodded. "Of course." Later that evening, Ethan returned home, but found himself unable to relax. Instead, he drove through the city without any destination in mind. Eventually, he ended up near the community education center Vanessa operated. The building had already closed for the day. Most lights were off. The parking lot sat nearly empty. Ethan remained inside his car across the street. He was not there to confront anyone. He was not even certain why he came. Then movement inside one of the second-floor windows caught his attention. Vanessa. She sat alone inside an office illuminated by a single lamp. Papers covered the desk. Through the glass, he could see her reading, organizing documents, and occasionally making notes. The scene felt remarkably ordinary. Yet somehow it revealed more than any conversation could have. This was the life she built. Not a life of resentment. Not a life spent looking backward. A life dedicated to helping others move forward. Ethan watched for several minutes before finally driving away. The next breakthrough arrived 2 days later. Daniel called shortly after lunch. "I found something." Ethan immediately canceled a meeting and drove to Daniel's office. The attorney handed him a small file folder. These were archived separately from the divorce records. Ethan opened the folder. Inside were references to mail deliveries, forwarding requests, and communication attempts that had never reached their intended recipient. His heartbeat quickened. "Are you telling me Vanessa tried contacting me?" Daniel nodded slowly. "More than once." Ethan stared at the documents. The room suddenly felt smaller. For years he had believed Vanessa chose silence. Now evidence suggested something entirely different. He turned another page. Then another. The dates matched the months immediately following their separation. Months when everything had fallen apart. Months when Vanessa might have needed him most. Ethan lowered the papers and stared across the office. Why would these records be missing? Daniel's expression darkened. "That is the question we need answered." As evening settled across Chicago, Ethan carried the file back to his car. The city lights reflected against the windshield while traffic moved steadily around him. He sat there for several minutes without starting the engine. The pieces still did not form a complete picture. But for the first time, he could clearly see the outline of something hidden beneath the surface. Someone had interrupted the story he thought he knew. Someone had altered the path of 2 lives. And deep in his heart, Ethan was beginning to fear that the answers he sought might lead much closer to home than he ever imagined. 2 days after discovering the missing communication records, Ethan Whitmore found himself standing outside his mother's estate just before sunset. The sprawling property overlooked a private stretch of shoreline north of Chicago. Normally, arriving there brought a sense of familiarity. Today, it brought tension. The file Daniel Harper assembled rested on the passenger seat beside him. Ethan had reviewed the documents repeatedly during the previous 48 hours. Every page raised new questions. Every unanswered detail pointed toward the same possibility. By the time he parked near the entrance, he already knew the conversation ahead would change something permanently. Inside the estate, Sophia Whitmore sat in her sunroom reading financial reports. Golden evening light streamed through the glass walls overlooking carefully maintained gardens. She looked up as Ethan entered. A smile briefly crossed her face. "This is a pleasant surprise." Ethan did not return the smile. Sophia immediately sensed the difference. Slowly, she closed the folder in front of her. "What is wrong?" Ethan placed the file on the table between them. "I have questions." Silence settled over the room. Sophia glanced toward the folder, but made no effort to open it. "About what?" Ethan sat across from her. "Vanessa." The name immediately changed the atmosphere. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in Sophia's expression. Concern, recognition, perhaps even fear. Then it disappeared behind composure. "That was a long time ago." Ethan nodded. "Not for me." Sophia folded her hands together. "What exactly are you asking?" Ethan opened the file and slid several pages across the table. "I found records showing Vanessa tried to contact me after the divorce." Sophia studied the documents without touching them. "And?" Ethan stared directly at her. "I never received those messages." For several moments, neither spoke. Outside, a breeze moved gently through the gardens. Somewhere in the distance, birds settled into the trees as evening approached. The peaceful surroundings only made the conversation feel heavier. Finally, Sophia sighed. "You have spent too much time looking backward." Ethan leaned forward. "Answer the question." His voice remained calm, but the determination behind it was unmistakable. Sophia looked away toward the windows. "What difference does it make now?" The response struck Ethan harder than any denial could have. It matters because my entire understanding of what happened might be wrong. Sophia closed her eyes briefly. You were hurting. She was hurting. The marriage was over. Ethan immediately replied. That is not what I asked. Another long silence followed. Then Ethan reached into the folder and removed additional records. Daniel found references to certified letters. He placed them beside the first documents. Letters that never reached me. Sophia stared at them quietly. Mom. Ethan's voice softened. Did you know? For the first time since the conversation began, her confidence seemed to weaken. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Years of carefully buried history pressed against the surface. Sophia slowly lowered her gaze. I was trying to protect you. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. The answer confirmed everything he feared. Protect me from what? Sophia looked up. From a future that was making you miserable. Ethan sat back in disbelief. You decided that for me? Tears unexpectedly appeared in Sophia's eyes. Age had softened parts of her that once seemed unbreakable. You do not understand. Ethan shook his head. Then help me understand. Sophia remained silent for several moments before speaking again. I watched you suffer for years. Her voice grew quieter. Every appointment, every disappointment, every conversation about children. Ethan listened without interruption. I believed your marriage was destroying both of you. Ethan's expression hardened. That was not your decision to make. Sophia nodded slowly. I know that now. The admission hung heavily between them. Ethan looked toward the windows, struggling to process what he was hearing. Then another thought entered his mind. One far more important than missing letters. He turned back toward his mother. Did Vanessa ever tell you something she never told me? Sophia froze. The question landed with devastating precision. Her reaction lasted only a second, but it was enough. Ethan immediately noticed. Mom. She looked away. Ethan's heartbeat accelerated. What did she tell you? Sophia's eyes filled with regret. Years of certainty seemed to crumble all at once. She came to see me shortly before she disappeared. Ethan felt the room spinning around him. And Sophia swallowed hard. She was pregnant. The word shattered every remaining assumption he carried. Silence consumed the sunroom. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the gardens. Inside, Ethan could barely breathe. For several moments, he simply stared at his mother. Then he thought of Ava, Arya, the photographs, the resemblance, the timing. Every piece suddenly aligned into a picture he had spent weeks trying to understand. Tears gathered in Sophia's eyes as she whispered the truth she could no longer hide. I thought I was helping you move on. Ethan lowered his gaze. Years had been stolen. Years that could never be recovered. And as the reality settled over him, only one thought remained. Somewhere in Chicago, Vanessa had carried this burden alone while raising two little girls who might very well be his daughters. Ethan Whitmore barely remembered leaving his mother's estate. The drive back into Chicago passed in a blur of headlights, traffic signals, and distant city lights reflecting against the windshield. One sentence echoed through his mind again and again. She was pregnant. For 6 years, he had believed Vanessa Brooks chose a life without him. For 6 years, he carried the pain of a marriage he thought had failed because two people slowly drifted apart. Now everything looked different. Every memory, every argument, every unanswered question. Most painful of all was the realization that while he mourned the possibility of becoming a father, he might have already been one. Sleep never came that night. Ethan remained in his penthouse office overlooking the city until sunrise. Old photographs covered the desk. Legal files remained open beside them. At some point after midnight, he found himself staring at a picture taken during the first year of his marriage. Vanessa stood beside him at a literacy fundraiser, smiling as though the future held endless possibilities. Ethan gently touched the edge of the photograph. Why did you not tell me? He whispered into the empty room. Yet even as he asked the question, part of him already knew the answer. She probably tried. The next morning, Ethan called Daniel Harper before 8 o'clock. Within an hour, they sat together reviewing every document connected to the separation. This time they were looking for something specific. Evidence of Vanessa's pregnancy. Evidence of communication attempts. Evidence that might explain how such a life-changing truth disappeared. By late afternoon, another piece of the puzzle emerged. Daniel uncovered records showing that Vanessa requested a private meeting with Ethan shortly after receiving her medical results. The meeting never happened. Several scheduling changes redirected the request. Additional correspondence disappeared. None of it looked accidental anymore. Ethan closed his eyes. The weight of lost years pressed heavily against his chest. I need to talk to her. Daniel nodded. Then talk to her. The simplicity of the advice surprised him. Ethan laughed bitterly. After everything? Daniel leaned forward. You are not asking for forgiveness. Ethan looked up. Then what am I asking for? The truth. That evening, Ethan drove to the community education center again. The building remained active long after normal business hours. Teachers, volunteers, and staff moved through hallways preparing programs for the following week. Ethan stood outside for several moments before finally entering. A receptionist immediately recognized him. Within minutes, Vanessa emerged from a nearby office. The moment their eyes met, both seemed to forget how to breathe. Neither spoke right away. The hallway around them remained busy, yet somehow the world felt completely silent. Vanessa was the first to break the silence. This is unexpected. Ethan nodded slowly. Can we talk? She studied him carefully. Something in his expression felt different. Less confusion. More certainty. Not here. 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other inside a quiet cafe overlooking the Chicago River. Evening sunlight reflected across the water while distant traffic hummed beyond the windows. For several moments, neither knew where to begin. Then Ethan placed a folder on the table. Vanessa immediately recognized some of the documents. Missing letters, communication records, old requests. Her expression changed. Where did you get these? Ethan answered honestly. Daniel found them. Vanessa lowered her gaze. Years of carefully controlled emotions suddenly felt difficult to manage. Ethan spoke softly. You tried to reach me. She nodded once. Several times. Ethan swallowed hard. Why did you stop? Vanessa looked out the window. Because eventually, I believed you made your choice. The words hurt more than he expected. I never knew. She smiled sadly. I know that now. Silence followed. Then Ethan asked the question he carried since leaving Sophia's estate. Were you pregnant? Vanessa closed her eyes. For a brief moment, 6 years disappeared. The cafe, the city, the present. Everything faded beneath the weight of that single question. When she finally opened her eyes, tears shimmered there. Not from anger, not from resentment, simply from exhaustion. Yes. Ethan felt the answer hit him with the force of every lost birthday, every missed bedtime story, every memory that never happened. He lowered his head. Neither spoke for several moments. Then Vanessa quietly reached into her purse. She removed a small photograph. The edges were worn from time. Carefully, she slid it across the table. Ethan looked down. It was an ultrasound image. 2 tiny forms visible against a grainy background. Written in faded ink across the bottom was a date from more than 6 years earlier. Ethan stared at it silently. Vanessa's voice barely rose above a whisper. I wanted to show you this before anyone else. Tears filled his eyes as the full truth finally settled between them. Not a theory, not a suspicion, not a possibility. The truth. And for the first time since Ava and Arya walked into that ballroom, Ethan Whitmore no longer wondered whether the little girls belonged in his story. He knew they always had. For a long time after Vanessa placed the ultrasound photograph on the table, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the cafe continued around them. Cups clinked softly. Conversations drifted through the room. Outside, evening settled across Chicago as lights slowly appeared along the river. Yet for Ethan Whitmore, everything seemed distant. His attention remained fixed on the small image resting between them. 6 years. 6 years of birthdays he missed. 6 years of bedtime stories never read. 6 years of believing he had lost a future that had actually existed all along. Finally, he looked up at Vanessa. Why did you never tell me after that? Vanessa's eyes reflected both sadness and peace. She had lived with this question for years. At first, I tried. Ethan nodded slowly. He already knew that part. The missing letters. The unanswered requests. The meetings that never happened. Vanessa continued. Then the divorce was finalized. I was alone. I believed you had moved on. Ethan lowered his gaze. I never stopped caring about you. Vanessa smiled gently. Maybe not. But caring and showing up are not always the same thing. The truth of her words settled heavily between them. Ethan could not argue. He had spent years building companies, signing contracts, and leading thousands of employees. Yet the most important chapter of his life had unfolded without him. After several moments, he asked the question that mattered most. Do they know? Vanessa immediately understood. No, Ethan nodded. What do they know? They know they are loved. They know they are safe. They know they were wanted from the moment I learned they existed. Tears threatened to appear again in Ethan's eyes. Vanessa was not accusing him. Somehow that made everything harder. She could have chosen anger. She could have chosen bitterness. Instead, she had chosen dignity. The same dignity that first made him fall in love with her years ago. A week later, they met again. This time the meeting took place at a small public park near the community center. Autumn leaves covered the walking paths, while children played nearby. Ethan arrived early. Nervous energy followed him everywhere. Board meetings never made him nervous. Public speaking never made him nervous. Today was different. Today he was waiting to meet two little girls who might change the rest of his life. When Vanessa finally appeared, Ava and Arya walked beside her. The twins immediately recognized Ethan from the baby shower. Hi, Ava said politely. Arya smiled. Mommy said we were meeting a friend. Ethan glanced toward Vanessa. She offered a small, reassuring nod. For the next hour, they talked about ordinary things. Favorite books, school projects, ice cream flavors. Ava proudly described a reading competition she recently won. Arya enthusiastically explained her dream of becoming an inventor someday. Ethan listened to every word. Not because he was trying to impress them, because he genuinely wanted to know everything. At one point, Arya tilted her head while studying him. You ask a lot of questions. Ethan laughed softly. Is that bad? No, she smiled. It just means you are interested. The simple observation nearly broke his heart. By the end of the afternoon, the girls seemed comfortable around him. Nothing dramatic happened. No sudden revelations. No emotional speeches. Just small moments. Shared laughter. Simple conversations. The beginning of something new. Over the following months, the truth gradually unfolded in age-appropriate ways. Vanessa and Ethan worked together carefully, always placing the girls' well-being first. There were difficult conversations, emotional conversations, honest conversations. Yet through all of them, one thing remained constant. Ava and Arya never doubted they were loved. Eventually, even Sophia Whitmore asked for the opportunity to apologize. Not because forgiveness was guaranteed, because accountability mattered. The process was neither quick nor easy. Trust rarely returns overnight. But genuine remorse has a way of opening doors that pride keeps closed. One spring afternoon, nearly a year after the baby shower, the entire family gathered at the community learning center Vanessa helped build. Children filled classrooms. Volunteers moved through hallways. Laughter echoed from the playground outside. Ethan stood beside Vanessa watching Ava and Arya race across the grass toward a group of friends. The twins looked happy, free, exactly as children should. For several moments, neither adult spoke. Then Ethan quietly said, I spent years believing success was measured by what I built. Vanessa looked toward the girls. And now? Ethan smiled. Now I know it is measured by who you show up for. Vanessa looked at him. The past could never be erased. Lost years could never be recovered. But healing did not require perfection. It required truth. And at long last, the truth was no longer hidden. Ahead of them, Ava and Arya waved excitedly for the adults to join a game. Ethan and Vanessa exchanged one final glance before walking forward together. Not as the people they once were, as the people they had become. And beneath the warm afternoon sunlight, surrounded by laughter, second chances, and the family neither thought they would ever have, a new chapter finally began.